The other day I headed over to English Electric Motor Company in Suffolk to take a test ride on an electric bike. If you get the chance, I recommend having a go, even if you're not planning to make any purchases. It's pretty interesting to experience what the future will be like, and they're eager to show them off. I only brought one camera with me, and my in-helmet audio doesn't work well enough, so you'll have to put up with a bit of wind noise in the actual videos, but I thought I'd give some thoughts on the experience. Also, keep an eye out for the uncut videos showing up as a POV series. The model I rode is an Energica Eva Ribelle RS. So it's made by Energica of Modena, Italy. It's part of their Eva series of naked bikes, and it's a Ribelle, which is sort of a street fighter or hyper naked type bike. The RS means it's set up for punchier acceleration, but to be honest, the base model does 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds, so it's not like it particularly needs it. As you can probably tell, this bike is aiming more for that premium sporty feel rather than trying to capture the budget market. But I'm not going to get into like the market right now. I could make a whole video where I tell you about its stats and what brands the suspension and brakes are and all that, but you can look that stuff up and I don't think it's that important. I'm going to show some video that I took, point out a few bits of interest and give an overall view of how my ride went and how I felt about it and what my impression of the bike was. Just before we start though, the camera picks up a lot of squeaking at low speeds that I noticed a lot less in person. Now, I get the impression some of the test bikes have been well shaken out, so we say. It also had a loose mirror, but that's not a big deal. Alright, this is my first time riding it. It's in eco mode, so it's fairly underwhelming. It still has enough to go at sort of ton speeds, but you really notice it holding back above 40 and it tops out at I think 55. This is a good mode for you to get an idea of the bike before you turn on the performance mode. Incidentally, the Speedo does the usual 10% overread thing. The little lights that indicate how much fun you're having are pretty cool. It's kind of weird it stops. It's always pulling slightly, but seems to go neutral when you stop. There was definitely one point it was caught off guard by it rolling slightly. I'm not sure if you notice how quiet it is. I am of course wearing earplugs, but even so there's no engine drowning everything out, so you can hear a lot more. There's no clutch or gears, nothing for your left side to do, but I only caught myself doing the no clutch confusion once. And maybe it's because I had an auto car for a while. The bike is quite heavy, so Energica have taken advantage of the motor to incorporate a forward and reverse crawl mode. I'm sure reversing a bike will stop being the funniest thing ever eventually.
Oh my god. I can see why Spicy did that so much.
Okay, enough piddling around. You all want to see sports mode. There. Happy? So yeah, it's got a fair bit of pull, but you would expect so from its stats. I eased into it a bit, winding on a little harder each time, and ended up with a big grin. The stats don't really tell the whole story of how this bike performs. A petrol bike has to spool up, build power, and needs the engine speed and gear managed to get best performance. Electric bikes have all the power on tap at any point. It all depends on how far you twist the throttle. There's also a lot of regen. I had it set to medium for my whole test, but you can set it up and down. Economy reduces regen, but sports mode has the full power of whatever setting you're on available. As soon as you roll off the throttle, the motor starts working as a generator, exerting a braking force as it changes kinetic energy into electricity, which goes back into the battery. I actually used the proper brakes very little, as it suited my riding style quite well. In terms of handling, it conducted itself quite well. I'm used to a sportier riding position and didn't feel like pushing someone else's 25 grand bike too hard into turns, but I never felt like the bike was holding me back. The suspension does a really good job. It's a high quality setup that can be adjusted for the rider's particular needs, and if you want, there's an Öhlins option. I'm not someone who would notice the difference though. The suspension did everything I asked of it and smoothed out the road nicely without taking away any of the feel. Speaking of smoothness, that's the thing that really wowed me, and you won't have got the impression of it from this video. It's smooth. Really smooth. Sure, if you roll off the throttle abruptly, the regen kicks in kinda hard, but that's kinda doing it wrong anyway. Roll on and there's no judder, no chug, just power. Maybe a lot of it if you rolled on hard. There's no engine, no roar, no vibes, just go. just silky smooth power with the little undulations of the road eaten by the suspension and the bike's own weight. Rocketing along in comfort and not quite silence, I could see this taking a few lives out of simply not realizing how hard you were going. That's not to say it wasn't exhilarating, quite the opposite. I loved it. That roll on is intoxicating, the corners coming right up at you as you regen down off the straight. It feels lovely sweeping around twisty bends. You'll note I even enjoyed a bit of twisty road in eco mode. Once you're into it, the bike is a pleasure to ride. I wasn't just smiling, I was laughing. I've never ridden or driven anything Italian before, but now I see what people mean. In town it was quite nice, a little wider than the VFR, especially at wing mirror level, and people do notice you less so they don't make space like they would for a petrol bike. It did have much nicer throttle control in town. I had it on sport mode here, where I should have probably had it on urban, but even so, it was a lot less janky. It's shorter than the VFR and turns in a bit better, which makes for more nimble threading. However, while the weight makes it stable in the move, when you get into these slow confined spaces, you really feel it. This bike is 260 kilograms and you will know all about it here. I do think the handling issues in town would smooth out with experience. I normally ride a very different style of bike, for instance, and a little adaptation would make it second nature. I didn't do any manual handling tests because it has a forward and backward crawl mode that work pretty well.
Did I f it up? Oh yeah, I f it up. But that's okay. Yeah.
It's got cruise control. I've never used cruise control on a bike before, but it's pretty cool. It uses regen too, which is nice. Setting it is a little tricky though. I'm sure you're dying to get in the comments and ask about range. It has enough. I did a bit of jeweler with cruise control set to 70 and 77 and it ate into my range, but overall my 56 mile trip over 2 hours used about 50%, which is more or less on spec. That included back roads, fast roads, villages, a bit of town, 8 or 9 minutes in a dual carriageway, and some pretty spirited riding on the way back when I'd gotten a feel of the bike. before I get into my conclusions, I just want to cover the brakes. I barely use them because regen is so good, but they're high quality equipment and they do a good job. But again, this is an area where you will feel the weight. So, what are my conclusions? Well, firstly, I really like it. I had a really great time. Obviously, it has a lot of power, it delivers it in great ways. The regen really suits my riding style. For all that, it's also a very easy and pleasant bike to ride, though. It feels very well made and premium, the parts are high quality. If you want, you can even option fancier stuff like carbon fiber parts and forged wheels. It's very comfortable. The seat isn't smooth, it has a nice texture to it that stops you sliding forward and keeps you where you choose to sit. The seat's a bit taller than my VFR, but not so much that it causes issues. I did feel weird riding it initially, but then I figured out that that's because it's shorter than my usual ride, and after a while it just felt quite natural. I do lean forward a bit, but not even close to a sports position. The weather protection could be better, but it's a naked bike, you get what you get. The one I rode had heated grips, but I think you'd need to put some handguards on to get real use out of them. This was also with the optional larger screen. Speaking of accessories, the selection is pretty limited, especially for luggage. Those little 22-litre side bags are basically it. It does have 2 USB outlets as standard, which is nice, and you can have keyless operation if you're feeling reckless. One thing it's really missing is a center stand, given that it's a chain bike. I didn't charge it, but it does take 25 kilowatt DC fast charging and 3 kilowatt AC charging, both onto the seat, and it uses a CCS connector. The range is fine for a day out, but you will probably have to adjust how you plan your tours and longer rides around it, though mainly involving planning your rest stops and chargers. I've seen some stuff about the battery having thermal problems doing hard motorway runs, but obviously that didn't come up in my test ride. From what I can tell, it's not an issue for fun days out, but if you're into touring, you basically need to take back roads and plan timings accordingly. The mirrors were pretty typically Italian, but they're reusable, especially since the bike doesn't vibrate. It is heavy. I'm used to that as my own bike is only 20 kilos lighter and usually weighed down with luggage. Unlike the VFR though, like all of that weight is low down. You won't notice the weight when you're pressing on, but it does have a lot of inertia, and if you're wiggling around traffic or doing car park handling, you definitely will. The maneuvering mode is really helpful. Alright, negatives done. I loved it. I had an absolute blast. I did some pretty hard riding on the run back, but the GoPro ran out of power, so I don't have any footage of it, but I was really happy with it. I was like super happy when I got back to the dealership. I really cannot overemphasize the smoothness though. I would love to try a tour on one of these. Like it'd be so much less tiring. If this is the future, I think motorcycling will be just fine. They are Italian Exotica money, though what you're getting is exotic and Italian. That means that while you can definitely have a try, it's not going to be in everyone's range when it comes to the buy. English Electric will happily give you a test ride though, and you should totally go for it. They do also offer a long-term test service where you cover delivery and collection plus a daily fee if you feel like really getting to know one. I'm not an expert on them, but if you have any comments, drop them below and I'll see if I can answer. Like and subscribe, I guess, if you liked it and or want to see more from me.